Hello, and welcome to NASA Grants and Cooperative Agreements 101, an overview of federal financial assistance. I'm Christiane Diallo, a senior analyst with the NASA Office of Procurement, Grants Policy and Compliance. The purpose of this training is to provide you with an overview of the federal financial assistance. There are three objectives that we will be covering. The first is to understand and identify the different types of federal financial assistance. Secondly, we want to understand how the federal financial assistance process works and also identify the key players in those processes. And last but not least, we want to understand the statutory authorization and regulations that govern federal financial assistance. Before we begin, let's go over a brief history of awards. The earliest assistance awards in the United States were land grants, where property rather than money was awarded. After the Constitution was adopted, the federal government made compacts with each state entering the Union, compacts which were passed by Congress and accepted by the individual territorial legislatures. Under these compacts, the federal government granted land to the states that was to be used to establish public primary and secondary schools. Throughout the 19th century, Congress continued to make grants to the states that provided for schools as well as grants to build public buildings and also aid internal improvements such as railroads. Grants played a significant role in the establishment of many of the nation's leading universities. And as our nations and population grew, so did the role of the federal grants. This graphic represents historical events that occur leading to the expansion of federal grants. Now let's take a look at each one of them. The first is the Land of Ordinance of 1785. This was established as a standardized system for the sales of lands and also allowed for land to be granted for public schools. Second is the Morrill Act of 1862. This provided grants to the states to establish land grant colleges and required states to submit annual reports for grant-related expenditures. In 1879, there was the Act to promote the education of the blind, and this was the first monetary grant. In 1887, we have the Hatch Act. This act established the first cash grant to the state. The Weeks Act in 1911 required states to provide matching funds and submit expenditure plans for a grant award. In 1977, we have the Federal Grant of Cooperative Agreement Act, which I believe some of you may be familiar with. This act clarified instruments of federal financial assistance. And last on our list is the Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations, also known as 2 CFR Part 200. This was established in 2014 and was aimed to streamline the grants award process, eliminate redundant regulations, and also emphasize performance measurements in awarding and evaluating projects. Now let's talk about the different types of federal financial assistance. NASA uses several types of federal assistance instruments, as described in the Federal Grant and Cooperative Agreement Act. This act provides guidance to government agencies in their use of federal funds, particularly by distinguishing between grant, cooperative agreements, and contracts, and clarifies the meaning of these instruments in order to reduce operational inconsistencies, inefficiencies, and waste. The act also encourages the use of competition. Now let's look at the difference between a grant and cooperative agreement. As you can see, grant and cooperative agreement are similar in nature. They're both used to transfer money or property to a recipient. They both support or stimulate a public purpose. That is, when the intended objective of a funded project benefits the public. The one difference between the two instruments is substantial involvement on the federal agency's part. Agencies, including NASA, uses the substantial involvement criteria to determine whether to issue a grant or a cooperative agreement. Such involvement exists when the responsibility for project management, control, or performance is shared by NASA and the recipient, and NASA has the right to intervene, including interrupting or modifying project activities. There are two categories of awards, discretionary and non-discretionary, also known as mandatory awards. Discretionary awards permit the federal government, according to specific authorizing legislation, to exercise judgment in selecting the recipient through a competitive award process. With discretionary awards, the government can put conditions on the award and determine the amount of funding. Most discretionary awards fall into the categories of research, demonstration, training, service delivery, construction, scholarships, and fellowships. As for non-discretionary awards, these are awards that a federal agency is required to award if a recipient meets the qualifying conditions. They are also known as entitlement awards because, upon meeting the qualifying conditions, the recipient has an enforceable right to receive the assistance. It is important to note that NASA does not have, nor does it issue mandatory awards. This table highlights some similarities and differences between a discretionary and non-discretionary award. The process for both begins with authorization from Congress and the agency closing out the award at the end of the project period. The differences lies in the publication, application, and selection. For discretionary awards, the agency advertises the availability of funds, prospective recipients apply, and the agency reviews the applications and select proposals for funding. For non-discretionary awards, the agency notifies eligible applicants who then submit required state plans, assurances, and certifications. Then the agency reviews those submissions for compliance. Now let's take a moment to check your understanding of the differences between a grant and a cooperative agreement. In this scenario, NASA is interested in supporting heliophysics research at universities across the United States and does not intend to design, coordinate, or influence the research. Instead, NASA will provide financial assistance to support project ideas from the public and monitor performance once projects are funded. Can you identify the appropriate award instrument? If you guessed grants, then you are correct. NASA is not the direct beneficiary of this project and is providing financial assistance to support a public purpose. Also, no substantial involvement is anticipated from NASA, therefore, it is a grant. Let's take a look at our second knowledge check. In this scenario, NASA would like to provide graduate fellowships to students at U.S. universities with the goal of introducing youth to STEM and building a diverse STEM workforce. The selected fellows will receive financial support from NASA while implementing research on their areas of focus. University faculty advisors must collaborate with a NASA technical advisor to develop their research proposals, and selected fellows will be mentored by a NASA technical advisor. Can you identify the appropriate award instrument? If you answer cooperative agreement, then you are correct. In this scenario, we can see that this project is to support a public purpose. However, seems like substantial involvement is anticipated on NASA's part. Following issuance of this award, NASA program officials will collaborate with faculty advisors to develop their research proposals. Again, the key word here is collaboration. And whenever substantial involvement, collaboration is anticipated on the agency's part, then cooperative agreement is the correct instrument to use. Prior to seeking federal financial assistance, understanding the process and the key players are very crucial. Within this section, we delve into both the financial assistance process itself and the responsibilities of the key players that are involved. The assistance process involves key players from the federal government, recipient organization, and beneficiaries with different responsibilities. Together, they implement the process that allows taxpayer dollars to be awarded in order to stimulate a public benefit. A key player for the federal government is the awarding agency. Within the recipient organization, parties include the project director or principal investigator on research awards, and then the project team. In the case of a pass-through award, the primary recipient subawards funds to subrecipient organizations. Note that the term subrecipients means recipients of subawards and not contractors under awards. Beneficiaries may be broadly defined as both the public in general and the specific group the award is targeted to assist. They should not be confused with recipients or subrecipients. The beneficiaries are the groups which benefit from the supported public purpose. Recipients and subrecipients do not benefit from the award. Rather, they act as the conduit for federal support of the public purpose by delivering services, conducting research, or performing in other areas. This table highlights the responsibilities of key players in the federal financial assistance process, which we touched on briefly in the previous slide. Now let's discuss the role of each. Within the federal government, Congress decides which activities deserve stimulation and support from the federal government and appropriates the funds. Prior to any agency issuing an award, Congress must authorize and appropriate funding for an award program. Note that Congress does not establish the federal award regulations with which federal agencies and award recipients must comply. The Office of Management Budget, OMB, is responsible for coordinating the development of government-wide award administration policies and rules with the federal award-making agencies, and then issues other guidance on awards administration to the agencies as needed. Federal agencies issue and administer award funds that Congress has appropriated. They are also responsible for ensuring that the awards are implemented in compliance with the regulations that OMB has instituted. The recipient organization, also known as non-federal entities, receive and implement federal awards. These entities include state and local, Indian tribal governments, institutions of higher education, hospitals, nonprofit and commercial organizations, and consortium of universities or states. Members of the general public are considered beneficiaries because they benefit from the results of award programs. For example, NASA Research Awards help advance the public's fundamental scientific knowledge of Earth and our solar system and the universe. NASA Fellowships Awards benefit the public by helping to build a diverse STEM workforce. Taxpayers have a vested interest in the efficient and effective use of federal funds. The media also plays a watchdog role by reporting on the misuse of funds or highlighting successful projects and the differences that they make in the beneficiaries' lives. Finally, there are interest groups who advocate for or against funding particular applicants, recipients, subrecipients, or programs for political reasons. Another component of the financial assistance process is the grants management lifecycle. The lifecycle encompasses 4 phases, each with its own sets of activities. The first is the pre-award phase. This phase involves 2 major activities: program development and application submission and review. After the appropriation is enacted by Congress, NASA plans and develops funding opportunities, which specifies the eligibility requirement for applicants. These funding opportunities are then posted on the NASA Solicitation and Proposal Integrated Review and Evaluation System, also known as INSPIRES. The funding opportunities are also posted in grants.gov. Applicants eligible for NASA funding opportunities submit proposals through INSPIRES. NASA conducts a review of these applications, including a peer review, as well as a pre-award risk assessment to determine whether an applicant qualifies to receive a grant and the level of risk posed to NASA if the grant is issued. For successful proposals, NASA issues the notice of award and obligates funds in the financial system and establishes a grant file. For unsuccessful proposals, a non-selection letter is issued to the applicant. Once a grant is awarded, the focus shifts to the post-award phase, implementation and management of the funded project. During this phase, the recipient draws down funds, provides performance and financial reports to NASA, and NASA monitors the award's performance. As a grant-funded project nears completion, there are final reporting and closeout activities to complete. During this phase, the recipient submits final reports. NASA ensures all final reports and deliverables are complete. Once the period of performance ends, the award is closed administratively. Understanding and adhering to statutes and regulations is fundamental for successful grant management. Let's look at a few statutes, regulations, and guidance that governs NASA grants. Statutory authorization is one of two pieces of congressional legislation that is required before a federal agency can make an award. Statutes are federal laws enacted by Congress. They typically command or prohibit something or declare policy. Each new statute is assigned a number according to the order of enactment within a particular Congress. For example, the fourth law enacted in the 113th Congress was numbered as Public Law 113-4. There are two types of statutes relative to federal grants and cooperative agreements: authorizing statutes and appropriations. Authorizing statutes provide federal agencies with the authority to provide federal financial assistance. It also sets forth program elements and authorizes appropriation. Appropriations, on the other hand, provides funds for federal agencies to make payments for specified purposes, such as grants and cooperative agreements. The National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958 is the statutory authorization for NASA. This legislation created NASA. It also provides NASA the authority to use appropriated dollars to carry out its objectives. Each year, Congress appropriates funds for NASA to execute this mission. In fiscal year 2023, Congress appropriated funding of $25.4 billion to NASA via the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023. NASA's provisions are found in Title III under Division B, Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies. The Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, is the codification of the general and permanent rules published in the Federal Register by the executive departments and agencies of the federal government. It is divided into 50 titles that represent broad areas subject to federal regulations. These regulations serve as enforceable rules that implement the various statutes. For the purpose of this training, we will focus on Title II of the 2 CFR, which provides government-wide regulations on grants and cooperative agreements. The 2 CFR Part 200, which official title is the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards Regulations, also referred to as the Uniform Guidance, is an authoritative set of rules and requirements for federal awards. It was developed and established in December 2014. The 2 CFR 200 streamlines regulations and requirements affecting award management by consolidating prior OMB circulars, which has led to a reduction in administrative burden on award recipients. The applicability of the administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements varies by recipient type. Recipients are required to comply with the terms and conditions of their awards, which include the federal awarding agency's regulations adopting or implementing 2 CFR 200. Subrecipients are required to comply with the terms and conditions of their subawards, which in most cases are the same as the federal awarding agency's regulations. The 2 CFR Part 200 consists of 6 subparts. Subpart A is your acronyms and definitions. Subpart B is your general provisions. Here you can learn about the purpose and applicability of the regulation. Subpart C is the pre-federal award requirement and contents of the federal award. This subpart provides guidance to both federal agencies and recipients on what to do prior to issuing an award and after receiving an award. Subpart D is your post-federal award requirements and provide guidance to both federal agencies and recipients on what to do after an award has been issued. Subpart E is your cost principles, and this provides guidance to the recipients on the types of expenditures that federal funds can and cannot be used to support a project. Subpart F is the audit requirements and provide guidance to both agencies and recipients on their roles and responsibility as it relates to audits. Although the 2 CFR Part 200 provides uniform guidance for all federal awards, the regulation is not effective until each awarding agency codifies it by issuing its own regulation. NASA has codified its adoption of 2 CFR 200 by publishing 2 CFR 1800. NASA's regulation states that 2 CFR 200 applies to all NASA awards, and it also outlines several exceptions to 2 CFR 200 that NASA has chosen to implement. These exceptions, as outlined in 2 CFR 1800, include a clarification that NASA issues awards to foreign organizations only on an exceptional basis. It is important to note that the 2 CFR 1800 does not apply the cost principles in subpart E of the 2 CFR Part 200 to U.S. and foreign for-profits. These entities must follow the policies and procedures of the Federal Acquisition Regulation at 48 CFR Part 30, known as the Cost Accounting Standards Administration, and Part 31, Contract Cost Principles and Procedures. In addition to the regulations, NASA has two important guidance that applicants and recipients must familiarize themselves with. The first is the Proposer's Guide, which outlines policies and procedures for submitting applications to NASA for federal financial assistance. The second is the NASA Grant and Cooperative Agreement Manual, or GCAM. The GCAM provides award management policies and procedures to facilitate NASA's compliance with 2 CFR Part 200 and the 2 CFR Part 1800, as well as guidance addressing the various processes that make up the grant's lifecycle. Starting in early January 2024, the two guides will be consolidated, with content internal to NASA being removed. The revised guide will be exclusively centered on policies and procedures relevant to NASA grant applicants and grant recipients. The guide will also be accessible at the Grants Policy and Compliance website at the link provided here. Recipients must adhere to the terms and conditions upon receiving a NASA award. Failure to comply with the terms and conditions of an award can result in potential consequences, including the risk of losing funding or becoming ineligible for future awards. Terms and conditions may be administrative, based on regulations or policies, or programmatic, based on specific requirements imposed by the program office, such as the timing and content of a particular report. Additional terms and conditions, referred to as specific conditions, may be placed on an award to aid the recipient in effectively managing the type of awards that is issued. Terms and conditions cover topics such as financial performance and progress reporting, changes in personnel or scope, property and equipment. It is important to note that the terms and conditions of an award flow down to subrecipients of a federal financial assistance award unless otherwise noted. This concludes the training on NASA's Grants and Cooperative Agreements 101, an overview of federal financial assistance. You now should be able to identify federal financial assistance types, identify the main parties that are involved within the financial assistance process, and also be able to explain the purpose of statutory authorization and regulations for federal financial assistance. If you have any questions about or comments on the information contained in this training, please contact the Grants Policy and Compliance team using the email provided on this slide. Here's a list of helpful links and resources as it relates to the information shared throughout this training. First is the Grants Policy and Compliance website. On this website, you can learn more about the Grants Policy and Compliance Office. You can find a copy of NASA Grant and Cooperative Agreement Manual, as well as the Proposer's Guide. Also, a list of frequently asked questions as it relates to NASA grants. We also have the link to the 2 CFR Part 200 here. Finally, if you are interested in learning more about grants at NASA, we encourage you to visit our YouTube channel using the link provided here. This channel was recently established and will house all grants-related training. Also, be on the lookout for Grants 102. This will be posted on our YouTube channel soon and will focus on NASA's grants life cycle and the recipient's responsibilities for effective grant management. We want to thank you again for your interest in NASA grants, and we hope you enjoyed the training.